happiness comes from the inside out.
When we're living congruently with our values, there's happiness because there is that sense of wholeness.
Wholeness is when the way of your being matches the truth of your being.
In this episode, we are focusing on the Enneagram Type 4, the Individualist. If you are a Type 4, listen up. You will learn much about yourself and maybe a little more than you want to. It might not feel great all the time, but there's always more understanding coming. For the rest of us types, we will all recognize traits in this podcast. We will identify and we'll say, I do that. But the Type 4 takes these things to an art form. I'm taking most of my information from a couple sources. One is from the book Enneagram Empowerment by Laura Miltenberger, and we have a link for that book in the show notes. It's a really great one, so I really recommend it. Also, Richard Rohr. Also, if you Google, you're going to get a lot of information about Type 4 Enneagram. So do some of your own research. There's plenty of YouTube videos. It's a great way to learn from different people about the Enneagram. You can learn your type, if you don't know it, for free by going to michellewingle.com/Enneagram. And again, I'll put that link in the show notes. Some famous Type 4s are Billie Eilish, Rumi, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, Joni Mitchell, Bob Dylan, Rihanna. I think it's so interesting when you start to actually think about some people that have these, how similar they are. Their similarities show up, and there's just a different energy or a vibe that these people all seem to kind of share. And that's what this is about. It's the way they move in the world. It's the way they see through and in the world. And if you're a Type 4, then you have a lot of great company. Type 4s are sensitive, authentic, expressive, they're introspective, they're gentle, creative, they're moody, they're self-conscious, emotional, compassionate. 4s see the world through the lens of their emotions. Sensitive, wistful, and creative, 4s desire a life that is unique and rich with meaning. With an eye for beauty, 4s are often artistic and aesthetically gifted. They're tender-hearted. 4s have the gift of finding meaning in both the lighter and the darker sides of life. 4s are tuned into their own emotions. They easily get pulled inward into the romantic and stormy world inside themselves. Although 4s present an image of uniqueness and intrigue, they are driven by fear of not knowing who they really are. They want to have a meaningful and individual identity. They want to get enough out of life, but they worry that they are incomplete. Their key obstacles are jealousy and ingratitude. They feel that others have something they don't, and in their yearning for more, they forget to find joy in the present. Enneagram 4 types might say these things about themselves. I rarely see things as black and white. It feels like I'm missing the puzzle piece in life that would make me feel settled, like I had arrived. I'm good at making things beautiful and meaningful. I've been told that I've been too dramatic. I feel misunderstood a lot of the time. I am drawn inward toward melancholy things like sad music or a dramatic, cloudy landscape. I feel like others have reached a level of satisfaction with life that I haven't yet received. I'm sensitive and my feelings are intense. Any single feeling can take over my whole body in a moment. I romanticize everything. I can be extremely moved by a song, a movie, a conversation, or even a trip to the grocery store. These are amazing people. amazing. Their key motivations for a type 4 are to have a unique identity, to live a significant life, to be loved and understood. And like probably many of you, I can identify with these things. Though I have things in my life that come right up that say, yeah, that's me. I want to be different. And we talked about in the introduction, those subtypes. For me, that's why that subtype made sense, where I want to be different. I want to live a significant life. Yeah, of course, right? And to be loved and understood. These are their motivations, meaning when they make a decision or when things come into their lives, the reason why they do things will probably be something about needing to be different or looking well and being significant and being loved and understood. Their fears may be, I'm not sure who I really am. I'm ordinary and insignificant. I will never be loved for who I am. Really fearful of those things and wanting to make decisions to make sure those things don't show up. The type 4 is called the Individualist. To work with these fears in the Enneagram, we use that individualism, which is both a virtue and a vice, when we're seeking to transform. So a fear of I'm not sure who I am, because we're an individual. Type 4 is an individual. They don't need to belong in a group, and that's okay. Or I'm ordinary and insignificant. Well, you're an individual. You are unique. It's not ordinary. It's a uniqueness. And I will never be loved for who I am. Look for individual love. Love within yourself. Individually love. And then that comes through. So some things that can trip up the type 4 may be self-absorption. Because they are the individualist, they can be so individual that they don't understand what's going on around them, or they don't connect with other people's individualism, so to speak. They might have emotional unrest. There's a lot of emotional ups and downs. And they might have jealousy and ingratitude. Those are some obstacles. For those obstacles of self-absorption, remember that everybody's an individual. Feel into your individualness and then reach out and connect into someone else's. For emotional unrest, create this emotional boundary and be that individual. It might be difficult for you to see where you end and someone else's begins emotionally. And so to kind of imagine and create this boundary around you where that doesn't happen. In their childhood, 4s have often had experiences of the present being unbearable and meaningless. Quite often, this was connected with a very painful experience of loss. This loss can be real, a death of a parent, an illegitimate birth, divorce, moving and being uprooted, or an undependable parent. Another child is born and that is preferred to them. Or it can be felt only emotionally. Positive role models may have been missing. Thus, the child in the search for identity turns toward the inner world. Because the original source of love was missing or was too weak, new sources of love had to be created in the imagination. The longing of 4s is directed to that lost love. It is a yearning to go home. They look forward to the day when the great love will come back, and they usually have convinced themselves this great love will redeem them. Some considerations for growth for the type 4 individualists are: know that you are not missing something. You are already a whole and complete person just as you are, and your uniqueness is irrefutable. What will you do now that you have already arrived in wholeness and completeness? You might want to ask yourself. Another idea is to observe yourself and ask, Am I investing my time and energy into my thought life or into my real life? The more you act like the kind of person you want to be, the more you will feel sure of who you are. It's okay that you withdraw into your own world to process things, but make sure you come back out and actively participate in shaping your own life, because the actions you take today create your future. Don't give emotions more power than they have. Emotions are important, but they are ultimately just something you experience. They are not you. Emotions tell the truth about how you are feeling, but they don't always tell the truth about reality. They don't have the power to read anyone's minds or motives, and they can't see as many sides to a situation as you can. You are bigger than your emotions. I think that's so true. It's such a balance between, we've kind of been telling us that emotions don't matter. They do 100%. We need to accept them in order to process them, in order to make them not get stuck within us. And yet we can't just run around making emotional decisions, or we can't just assume that because we're feeling this emotion, we understand what the other person meant by what they said or whatever. That can happen a lot. There's like this misunderstanding force can have with other people thinking that their emotion is telling them reality, and that's not always the case. Another consideration is, know that while you are beautifully complex and unique, you are not an anomaly. You belong here. You fit in here. You are here on this earth right where you are, just as you are, because you are meant to be here. Just because you're an individualist doesn't mean that we don't need individuals. So let those two exist at the same time together. Realize that fulfillment and contentment will only happen for you in the present. There is no person or thing in the future that will bring it to you. It is not on the road ahead. It's not missing inside of you. It's not something you haven't figured out yet. Contentment is an inside job. You will need to find it for yourself, but be sure to reach out and support in your pursuit. In so many different ways do we, or type 4s, think someone else has an answer that's better than the one they have. And while that's not a false statement, we need to make sure that that belief isn't pulling from who we are, or pulling from the contentment inside of us and believing in ourselves and letting ourselves be enough. So into the empowered thinking of a type 4, remember their motivating fears are, I'm not sure who I really am. I or the things I produce may be ordinary or insignificant. These are fearful of these things. Or that I will never be loved for who I am. A negative thinking example may look like, I feel so jealous lately. They must have feelings for someone else. Why else would I feel this way? This is emotional reasoning. This is what I was talking about before. I feel jealous, therefore they must have done something. Or why would I feel this way? That's a very big trap of the type 4. But an alternative empowered thought would be, I am feeling jealous. But I know that jealousy is a feeling and it's not a fact. I will take the facts of the situation into consideration. For a type 4, it's really important. Again, they're going to go inside and have this conversation. We need to come out and have this conversation. 4s need to recognize that conversation that's going on within, because they might think that they're having it outside when they're not. And it's important to get it out and speak it in order to find what's going on, because most of the time it's probably far more complex than that, even that one feeling. Another example of negative thinking type 4s might have is, I made a big mistake at work. My boss is going to be so mad. I'll probably get called in. I might even get fired. That would look so bad on my resume. So an empowered thought would look like, I made a mistake at work, but I'm human and humans make mistakes. So I'm hopeful that my boss will be understanding. This is more likely than me getting fired. And finally, in another example of negative thinking would be, I would never say that unless I was super angry. They must be angry. So we're mind reading again. An empowered thought would be, what they said sounded angry to me, but I cannot read minds. I will have to ask them what they meant if I want to find out. So getting curious is really, really important to a type 4. To recognize when they get that hit, they'll probably feel it emotionally. Well, all of these things kind of, you can feel that hit of emotion, and to use that as an anchor to say, oh, I felt a big emotion. Let's get curious. What's really going on? I'm feeling this. Is that true 100%? Do I know it's true? And then getting curious and being very clear about asking questions. Not accusatory, like, why, what were you probably meant something or even to say, hey, right, I'm just getting a hit of this feeling of anger, and I just want to make sure that I'm reading the conversation correctly, or that I'm reading our interaction correctly, because I didn't mean to make you angry, or that kind of thing. But to be very clear outwardly might be a struggle. But if we can understand that using that way of doing it helps to relieve those motivating fears, I think type 4s would do it. I think it would be a motivator, because those fears are really heavy for the type 4. A really good empowering question for the type 4 is, what are the feelings and what are the facts? That's a really empowering question in every moment, because in asking what the feelings are, we're honoring the individual. And then when asking what the facts are, we're actually moving out of that individuality and bringing the situation in. So we're still ourselves, but we're expanding into it instead of just walling ourselves off. Some helpful self-care for type 4 looks like this. For the heart or for the emotions, find a creative outlet that serves others and draws your focus outward. Make a gratitude collage with photos, magazine cutouts, textiles, or other materials. So something beautiful, but it's really about gratitude and grounding gratitude in. She says, find a box or a locket to hold your feelings when you are not able to. When big feelings sweep in, but your attention is needed elsewhere, you can acknowledge the feeling for what it is, and then visualize placing that emotion into this box. It's all your own, only yours, and then you can get back to it later. Really good self-care. For the body, the self-care looks like learn about the emotionally healing benefits of food. For example, cashews are high in a calming amino acid called tryptophan. Use food to honor your emotions instead of trying to change them. That's big. I think we all could use that. Another body self-care is to smile at strangers, hug your loved ones, keep your gaze lifted, look outward. I think there's a lot of type 4s that maybe will look like they're on the autism spectrum when it's really their type 4 personality shining through. Or it could be both. You know, we can learn a lot from people that go inward, or the people that are, you know, in that inwardness. Sometimes the ego doesn't flow out. It's more directed in. And so we don't want it to be directed in, but they are able to let go of pieces of the ego in a way that maybe we could learn from. Another body self-care is to drink water often and find a delicious way to eat or drink lots of greens. Water and green foods are cleansing. And because we're so much into our own space as a type 4, we need to clean out that energy. We need to keep it fresh, and because it can get stagnant inside ourselves. We all are that way. If we go inside ourselves, we're much more critical of ourselves. We are much more hard on ourselves than we are on other people. And type 4s are especially prone to this. So use water and food and things to help that process be clear and fresh. For the mind, self-care, take quick gratitude breaks. For 3 minutes, write down everything you can think of that you're grateful for and happy about. Go outside often to look up at the sky and around you at the world. Feel your perspective open up. Feel your chest loosen. Finally, for every feeling you name one fact of reality too. One thing that's interesting about these self-cares is sometimes when it's your type, you'll listen to these and you'll say, yeah, that was really impactful for me. You might have already incorporated these kinds of things into your life. And because they were so helpful, that almost is another witness to your type. Is it's like, yeah, that was important for me. Where the next person, it was like, oh, that's a great idea. It seems to just feed your particular type when you hear your self-care for your type. I just want to touch on these subtypes. We have the movement, we have the social, sexual, and self-preservation subtype. And we talked about this in the introduction, but just because we're a few episodes in, I just wanted to touch on these. There's subtypes within the Enneagram that any number can be. There's some subtypes that are a trine, so certain numbers have those. And then this particular one, which are these subtypes, any number can be any of these types. And so you can see how they kind of shift your type a little bit. She calls it the social subtype. These types prioritize the need for group belonging and social status. The sexual subtype, which she calls it that. I don't understand why it's called that necessarily. I'm not upset by it, but to me, whenever I read it, I think it's this deep connection subtype. And these types prioritize the need for meaningful individual connections and experiences. And then there's the self-preservation subtype, this is more, they have physical needs that they are aware of. So these type prioritize the need for security and material necessities. They always know when it's time to eat. It's like, we got to get some food. They're just very aware of that. Or, hey, if we don't get this, then we're going to have trouble. And maybe it's monies or it's something like some material thing that they think that that it's not going to be okay if they don't get it. It's totally just one of the subtypes, just to understand that if you're not that subtype, that's important to them. And then if you are that subtype, to recognize not everybody has those same worries that you do. And that can be particularly true for a type 4 because, again, they're an individualist. So they think what they're thinking is what is really true for everybody because they're so in tune with themselves. And some of us are not as in tune with ourselves, or we're tuned differently. These are some things that once we start to recognize that, it's really freeing, actually. That's what understanding these types, I hope, are really about, because it's like, oh, that's just the way I am versus that is the reality. So thinking, oh, I need to have this. That person doesn't have it and they're stressing out. And so then they'll bend over backwards trying to give that person what's really their own need. And when we say, oh, that's what that is, then it just takes that pressure off that we didn't even know was there. So the wings for a type 4 are type 3, the achiever, and type 5, the investigator. We need to balance out these energies. You've got the achiever that is the get it done, will achieve, knows who to talk to get things that they need. They can lean on that, but they also need to lean on the investigator that works it out, looks at the logic of it, because it maybe an individualist might be just stuck being the individual, but if they use one wing of the achiever to move out and get things done, and then the other one, the investigator, to also find out the facts and get the story behind it and the logic, those are two really important pieces that a type 4 needs. And so when they balance those out, they can fly in balance and straightforward and high in the sky. Like all the types, there are different levels of living in the type 4 world, and many people have moved from one to another, and maybe that's something you can identify with. And sometimes we live in these spaces just in and out throughout a day. Sometimes we show up in an egoic state. Sometimes we're just on autopilot. Sometimes we're really in that enlightened state. Everything's just kind of in flow and we are at our best self. When a type 4 is living in their egoic state, it may look very dramatic. They might be obsessed with perfection. They might be depressed. They might put themselves down, or that might be a way that they think they are being kind, but it's an egoic frame of mind to put yourself down in order to make someone else feel more comfortable, or maybe to beat somebody to the punch, right? Because we're fearful that we're not enough as a type 4. So I'll say it first so you don't have to. Just think about that as the egoic way of living. Type 4s can also be very envious in the egoic state, where they compare themselves with other people. On autopilot, type 4s can look introverted, they can be moody or melancholy, they can be insecure or hypersensitive. It's kind of where they just hit mid-ground without any effort, maybe, or maybe without their wounds being poked, so they're just going through life on autopilot. And I think that's a good way to look at it, is when we move into that egoic state, that there's a wound getting a little hit. But when type 4s move into their enlightened stage, they can be very creative. They can be emotionally honest and strong. They can be sensitive, compassionate, intuitive, and they can be true to self. I think that's fascinating, that the individual who maybe starts out in separation from others, maybe in that egoic state, it's like, no, I cannot be like everyone else. And that's where the emphasis is trying not to be the same. Almost the same thing, but in an enlightened version, it just becomes true to yourself. And there is no kind of angst about it, or there's no comparison. It's just being comfortable with the truth of yourself. And then when you present yourself that way, we all honor it. We all do not question it for a single moment. The type 4s are in the feelings wisdom, of course. They get most of their knowledge through a feeling, through the emotional part, of course. And they also are in the shame trine. So type 4s, like type 2s and type 3s, we need to overcome shame or feelings of less than. That would be, or I'm not enough, would be what the type 4 would see, that shame. Type 4s are also part of the withdrawn stance. I talked about that earlier, the different subtypes. These types tend to keep more to themselves, and they often feel overwhelmed by the world around them. This is also a type 5 and a type 9. Some of them are very social and relational, but when it comes to meeting their essential needs, instead of looking outward or toward other people, they will turn inward or withdraw. So some healthy boundaries for this withdrawn stance would be to realize that your needs and preferences must be stated in specific and concrete language if you want them to be acknowledged and respected. Again, I went back to, it needs to be spoken outward. It needs to not be just in your head with conversation, but outward. When you say yes without wanting to say yes, contemplate why. 4s often have trouble saying no because they don't want to be disliked. Think about that and begin to create that boundary, because again, we talked about boundaries. When you say yes without wanting to say yes, then I don't know who you are. Maybe it's just my type, but a resentment's going to show up almost immediately when you do that. I don't know if that's just a character flaw. It's almost just like an equation. If I say I'm going to do something that I really don't want to do, then I have just created resentment. And now, usually I'm with somebody that I love is asking me to do something, and now I have this resentment there. So if I create a boundary about when to say yes, then that resentment, I don't have to worry about dealing with that resentment later on. And to just kind of see it that way, not like, because that's another shame thing is we're like, oh, well, I resent that person. They're a good person. And we're just spinning in our heads trying to change our feeling of resentment because that feels like it's so real for the type 4. And there's a lot of energy spent trying to backtrack and talk yourself out of this resentment when the real problem was that the boundary wasn't kept within yourself to say, in order for me to keep myself from feeling resentment, I can't do that particular thing. Another healthy boundary would be when you feel offended, disrespected, or unappreciated or invaded, pause to notice if one of your personal boundaries has been crossed. Once you identify the boundary, ask yourself, how can I explicitly articulate this boundary to the person who crossed it? Not accusatory or not in anger, but very clearly articulating that this was frustrating to me or this is how I took it, using that individualist, taking responsibility, saying it from your perspective. I took it this way and I want to be responsible for my thoughts and feelings. And so I want you to know that for me felt like this. Use very ownership words as you speak about your boundaries. That's will feel very authentic to the person you're talking to, and they will honor it much more because you are using that individuality, that individualist language to explain yourself. When you're feeling frustrated in a relationship, your tendency might be to pull back, to be quiet, change the subject, avoid the person, or even leave. But if you care about the relationship, you should know that these behaviors are unhelpful to you because they communicate that you do not care. And yet to you, you think you're caring because you're not rocking the boat, right? You're not giving them the emotional hit that you're used to having. But we don't think that way. We don't move that way. And so it comes across to us as uncaring. So it's important to ask yourself which boundary you're going to allow to continue to interact in this relationship. How will you show up as your best self? What do you need to show up as your best self in this relationship? When a type 4 interacts with a type 1, there might be a little bit of struggle there because the reformer looks at almost the outside laws to rule their world, and the type 4 has very inner laws that run their world. And so there might be that might be where some conflict can come in. And if we kind of move those together, then it's a great growth for both. The 4 and the 2, the 4 goes to the type 2 when they're in stress. So the type 4, being a very much of an individualist, all of a sudden becomes very selfless and letting their boundaries guard down, and they help everybody and they take care of everybody. They stop paying attention to themselves, and that's a stressor. That's not the authentic part of a type 4. So it's a big way to recognize that. Then the fight or flight, freeze or appease, type 4s would probably be the appease, and that's how you know they're in stress. All of a sudden they're just asking everyone else what they need and taking care of them. The type 4 and the 3 are, they're wings, so they're going to share a lot of attributes, and they're going to lean on each other and understand each other and hopefully give each other the best of what they have. They're very different. Achiever is very outward looking, where again, an individual is looking very much inward. Type 4 and the 5, again, the individualist is very much about feeling inside, where the investigator is very much about understanding how things work on the outside. So see how those dynamics would show up together and beautifully teach each other. The 4 and the 6, the 6 can teach the 4 to be loyal to themselves and also to reach beyond themselves and look at maybe some other people. The 4s might struggle with authority figures. That just might be something that's a struggle because they have their inner authority. And 6s are all about exterior authority. So they need some understanding, some teaching from the 4 to look inward and to be loyal to themselves. The 4 and the 7, I don't even know. That would be interesting how those two to come together. The 4 is very, very careful and calculated and internal. The 7 is very uncalculated, needs things to be uncalculated, needs things to be unruly a little bit, and very much outward in the world. Their movement is letting go, being free. They just want to be free. The 4 and the Challenger are going to, it depends on how that works. So one thing that's interesting is the type 4 is considered the most feminine, not girly necessarily, but a feminine, gentle energy. And so it's the yin energy. And then the 8 is actually the yang, or the masculine energy. And so those two are two halves of the same whole. They're almost opposites, I would say. Challenger very much outwardly focused, and challenging outward. Individualists very individually focused, or challenging themselves individually. The type 8 Challenger is very much about defending the underdog, and the type 4 feels like the underdog, or maybe feels like the underdog is something to be shameful about. And so there's all these kind of opposites with those two. The 4 and the 9, Peacemaker, both of those are gentle. They're very similar in their more of a gentle energy. They're more of a Peacemaker is actually looking outward again to find out where the peace is, and the 4 may be going inside. That is the type 4 Enneagram, the Individualist. Again, there's a whole bunch of links in the show notes to find out your type, to download the graphics that you need to understand your values. Values are an important part to kind of just narrow down who you are, to understand your motivations and why you do things, and then to share those with other people so that they can understand you a little better. Type 4s, we want to understand you better. Something's coming up at the Wholeness Network podcast. We are going to do a fun book club where we talk about the book Bittersweet by Susan Cain. I will put a link also in the show notes. We're going to have a big Zoom class and talk about it, talk about the idea of bittersweet. When everybody talks about the new normal, that we're in the place of new normal, I think bittersweet has a lot to do with where we're at in our world right now, that there's a lot of positives and pain happening at the same time. And so how do we calibrate to that? How do we think about that? What do we do with that? And we'll talk about that. It's coming up July 13th. Just give us your email so I can send you a Zoom link, and we'll have a great conversation. Next time we are talking about the type 5, the investigator. So we will see you then. We invite you to thewholenessnetwork.com, where you'll find the Wholeness Library. Inside, you'll find tutorials, downloads, mini classes, and all sorts of streaming content for you on your wholeness journey.